Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Nintendo Everything Refresh, the weekly show where we keep all of our listeners up to date in everything new and exciting in the world of Nintendo. I'm your host Nick Serpa, joined today by Tom Chaplin.
Hey everybody.
And we've got Nicolas Shade.
Hello everyone.
And man, it has been quite a week. We got a little bit of Nintendo news, a little bit of Zelda news that, I mean, Tom, you've already dug deep into that. I'm sure you'll be the expert on this gameplay trailer.
Oh my goodness. I mean, there's what is it? A conversation that's on our channel where we broke down the gameplay originally was like an hour 45 minutes. I think I cut it down to 45 minutes. So you can thank me if you did end up watching that. Like we talked for a long time about just 10 minutes of gameplay.
Release the unedited cut.
Right.
Yeah, that's incredible. You know, really, if you think about it, you're kind of doing Nintendo's job for them. Like you're explaining this game at the level that the fans want.
It's true. This is the first gameplay we've seen that's not like highly edited trailer. So I don't know. It was fun to see. But I assume we'll get into it proper in a second.
Yes. Yeah, we will definitely talk about that first. We're also going to talk about the death of E3, it being officially canceled.
Again.
I'm sure we all have some opinions on that. Yes, again. Yeah. Maybe for good this time. We've got some game announcements to go through, some pretty interesting smaller titles that came out this week, so lots to get into. But yeah, let's start with the big ticket item. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom got a 10-minute gameplay demo over on their official YouTube. Not a direct, but just kind of, staff from the game sitting down, walking through just unedited gameplay of this game, or it should mostly unedited. And yeah, this is, as Tom was mentioning, this is the first real look we've had at some of the newer, features that they're adding to this game. And there's a lot to get into, but I think the big thing that they'd kind of hinted at in some of the previous trailers was the fact that you can now build all types of things. They mostly showed vehicles, but you can use this new mechanic called fusion to take all these trees that you're cutting down and take these various mechanical doodads and pieces that you're finding and use them to stitch together into all types of things. They showed a boat being built. They showed, in previous trailers, they've shown people creating flying vehicles and things like that. You could almost call it the Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts of The Legend of Zelda.
I don't think anyone wants to call anything that.
Now, Nick, I don't want to already start correcting you, but
okay.
The ability to build boats is called Ultra Hand, and fusion is merely for the weapons. So you've made a grievous error. Asianuma would not be pleased. Because they're so different.
This is a great point, Tom. They're so different. Also, it's just amazing that they are referring to the Ultra Hand, which is one of their old school toys. Right. It's incredible.
I think they're clear. I think that's important that they're tapping into that. I think that's a very they made that choice very particularly.
Yes. So, Tom, I want to hear your thoughts since you've dug into this game so deeply. What really stuck out at you the most from this whole gameplay demo? Was it this new building mechanic that I'm sure we all have a lot of thoughts on? Was it that he can go through ceilings now? What was catching your attention?
I mean, part of because again, we did a trailer breakdown of the direct trailer, and then we did the breakdown of this. Part of it was oh, okay, that's what they're calling this mechanic. I don't think there was actually anything new shown off other than the enemies and all these powers we kind of saw. We saw fusion, but they wouldn't tell us. We saw rewind or whatever it's called.
Recall.
Recall. We saw that, but they didn't show us anything. We saw Ultra Hand as well. They didn't explain it though. So now we actually know what's going on. And one, it's interesting that the game looks the same in a lot of ways too. I like how Asian Enemy says, the world's changed in a lot of ways, but we don't have time to show you. It's like you're the one who sets the time for this, Nintendo. It's not like I have all the time in the world.
This doesn't have to be a 10-minute gameplay demo. Yes, we will watch whatever you show us.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it's up to you how long this lasts for. So, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of what stood out to me was, kind of how little they showed off, kind of, if that makes sense. Someone who's been breaking down the trailers, it's like, oh, they're just giving vocab words, like giving us a vocab terms that explain these abilities. It is shocking. I'm sure it's going to be, and I've heard somewhat similar opinions from you, Nick, like contentious that they're leaning so far into like the systemic kind of physics-based play of Breath of the Wild rather than maybe pumping in more old school Zelda frameworks into that Breath of the Wild formula.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any doubt that, they're doing this on purpose, right? Like, I'm sure they've alluded at some very cool story elements in the previous trailers, and I'm very impressed with, like, the overall just kind of vibe of this game. It seems like it's going to be a little bit darker than Breath of the Wild, but we don't really know a lot about the story, like, all things considered, and I'm sure that's intentional. But yeah, like, for me, I mean, as much as I loved a lot of the new elements that they introduced to the franchise in Breath of the Wild, I didn't like everything. I wasn't really a huge fan of, the way they kind of shifted the dungeons and, you had the divine beasts instead. I didn't really find those super fulfilling. The shrines were fun for a little while, but, ultimately the game I had a good time with it, but it didn't hit me in the same way that some of the older Zeldas did. And so, for me to seeing a lot of the same in this game, and some of these new systems that they're introducing, like the fusion and being able to build these vehicles, like they're cool for sure, but those aren't things that necessarily are going to make me be like, wow, I need to go pick this up on day one, Mm-hmm. And, but I can see for folks who are really invested in the whole, I want to play this as a sandbox style game, I really want to push the limits of what I can do in this world and what I can make. I can see why that would be exciting to a lot of folks, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective on it. I also think, kind of like what Tom is saying, they're very intentionally hiding certain things. Like, they are showing us a very limited scope of what the entire game is, and I believe that is because things like potential dungeons or the existence of shrines or stuff like that is things that they don't really want to get into, which, it's certainly a way of marketing the game, but I think it also shows that they probably have some bigger elements that they just don't want people to be aware of. Like, if shrines were in this game, right, it wouldn't exactly be a huge spoiler to be showing them, which would make me believe that the fact they haven't been featured at all means either they're gone or there's another replacement, like a similar feature. For instance, we see in the trailer, it looks like there are certain areas that are marked off as being caves, which I could imagine that being an alternative where, like, you go into a cave and there's a small exploration segment, maybe you get a reward at the end. Kind of more similar to, I guess, like an Elden Ring dungeon than a Breath of the Wild shrine. Similarly, I wouldn't be surprised if we do get a more traditional element, like a traditional dungeon, I guess, and it's just something they don't want to be advertising because they kind of want it to be a plain find out, having it be like relatively light on the details, sort of like what they did with the original Breath of the Wild's marketing, where a lot of it was the Great Plateau before the game released. It's definitely something we have to wait and see, but I'm sure there's a lot of other things that are less, I guess, like, sort of, I don't want to say gimmicky mechanics, but, like, these kind of very unique things that they're marketing the game as. There are probably other elements that are going to be more traditional or more just accessible to a wider audience that they're just not showing yet.
Yeah. I will say, I mean, I'm glad they showed off a little bit more of the Sky Islands in this gameplay demo. At first glance, they don't seem drastically different to, like, what you would see on the land, but just the idea of, like, here's a whole new kind of region of this game that you have to traverse, and even just traversing around, getting up there in of itself is a puzzle. How are you going to do that? You know, I could see some really interesting gameplay kind of taking place in between these sky islands and on them. We've only really seen like a few of them, but I wonder, I mean, they look pretty big, some of them do.
Yeah.
And so if you have everything that was happening, you know, on the surface in Breath of the Wild, presumably a lot of it kind of changed up for this re-release, at least to some extent, and you have a bunch of stuff going on up in the sky, I could see there being a lot of mysteries and little hidden secrets kind of tucked away that, yeah, you're really only going to get the sense of playing the game.
Well, it looks like, and we saw this, this is the first confirmation that we've seen. I mean, and again, because it's so clear, because it's a gameplay thing and not a trailer, that the islands are going to involve the Zonai tribe from Breath of the Wild, right? Like this really ambiguous ancient tribe that, I don't know if they're like in war with the Sheikah or they're older than the Sheikah tribe, but they were in Breath of the Wild, but not like the tribe, just like their etchings and their branding, right? And now that looks like the story is going to revolve around this new ancient tribe, which, you know, we only get ancient tribes in Zelda every now and then. It's usually just Sheikah all the time, right? So, I mean, there might be some interesting narrative that does surprise us. My prediction is the dragons that just kind of fly around and do nothing in Breath of the Wild are actually going to be important to the story. Because of that Zonai connection, and you know, the guest I had on the breakdown, Miles, pointed out that on the top of, I think, Mount Lanayru, there's a new tower there that wasn't there before, and so there's something that maybe the dragons will play. And we saw the dragons a bunch in the gameplay. I mean, it was almost all I think we saw 2 or 3 of them, different shots of the dragons flying around again. I think that will maybe help bring some of that world building lore, like magic fantasy story stuff that maybe Breath of the Wild lacked a bit, back to Zelda with all this Zonai dragon stuff. I don't know. I'm excited to see how the narrative structure changes as well around these like new mechanic changes.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Nicholas, where are you at with everything that we saw in this gameplay demo? Are you feeling more excited now? Are you feeling kind of about where you were? Do you have any other kind of big unanswered questions that you kind of hope they address before the game comes out?
So for the most part, I'm just satiated, because I think in previous directs, I've pointed out that it feels like a lot of the trailers for Tears of the Kingdom were kind of samey and didn't show a lot. And even if this is still a pretty limited view in terms of it just focusing on these new specific mechanics, it's still just showing more of the game. So that alone just makes me happy. But in general, I think I find these new mechanics really interesting, Fusion and Ultra Hand being the 2 main ones. I don't know how much they'll appeal to me personally, because I'm just not typically that big of just a sandbox player, I guess. But it's still cool to see these, and again, like I mentioned, the fact that they're showing these few specific elements and leaving out some of the wider ones makes me think that there's more that they're going to have to show off. And so I'm still very excited. I'm looking forward to what they have to show, if they're going to show it, because that's the other thing. The fact that they're doing like this 10-minute gameplay reveal makes me feel like they really don't want to market this game super, super heavily in terms of just revealing all of the new elements. So I don't know if we're going to get like a Zelda Direct at this point, because this is what I assume would have been in it.
I can't imagine they would at this point. I mean, and frankly, they don't need to. I mean, I imagine this game has already sold pre-orders through the roof. I would be surprised if it hadn't.
I believe it is outpacing. It's outpacing Breath of the Wild. Right?
Yeah, I think it's past the amount of pre-orders for that Breath of the Wild had.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't surprise me at all, considering how massive the Switch install base is at this point. Well, on top of all the gameplay, Nicholas, I'm sure you were very excited about the last thing they showed in this presentation, which is a absolutely beautiful, in my opinion, Switch OLED model that is launching. Is it the same day as the game?
A couple weeks
Shortly
before.
After?
On April the 28th.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, this thing looks great. It's, you know, I feel like Nintendo definitely could be doing more with these limited edition Switch releases. I think this is the best one I've seen from them so far, personally.
Yeah, I think some of the the colors on the Joy-Cons could be a little bit different. I don't know if I like the left Joy-Con, the way that they have the green all in like one smudge at the bottom. But in general, I do think it looks really nice. I'm finally picking up an OLED model, so I'm sacrificing myself, considering that they're probably going to be releasing a new system within like the next year and a half.
Look, that's the dilemma I am in.
Yeah.
I see this little thing and I want it, and there's a part of me that says just get the credit card out, just do it. It'll be $5 million in 3 weeks, you know, you'll never see it again. It'll be like these 3DS games that no one can get, right? Yeah. But there's another Switch coming. I'm sorry. I know that. Look, I know I have to like put a penny in the swear jar when I say there's another Switch coming out, but there is, right?
Do you have insider info, Tom?
I can't.
Inside sources?
I can't trust this deluxe OLED Zelda, even though I want it, because I don't have an OLED either. I'm like, why would I need an OLED? But I can't trust it.
I mean, I'll tell you why. It's because games look freaking gorgeous on the OLED screen.
Yeah, but I've never played in handheld. That's the other thing. It's like I couldn't, like, how do I justify this?
Really? So you think like with a big game like this, you play it handheld like at least a little bit, or not really? You're all docked all the time.
Well, and for being the video guy at everything, like I've always docked because I gotta record footage for stuff too, and I'm sure I'll be doing plenty with this game. So yeah, I can't imagine playing much handheld. And if I do, it's for a short spurt, which I can just deal with the worst screen for like a day or two, right? If I'm traveling.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. Yeah, I think it looks really good. I do think it's going to get scalped to high heaven, like everything else interesting Nintendo has released in the last 4 years. But yeah, I think it looks really cool.
Yeah.
It's got a little bit of a small price premium over the Switch OLED. It's like an extra $20. But,
10, I think, yeah.
Or 10, yeah, extra $10. But yeah. I don't have anything else to say about it other than it looks really cool. Yeah. And if I didn't have a Switch OLED, this would probably be the one I would buy.
Tom, I think you make some very rational, reasoned comments, and I probably should be listening to them, but...
Oh, I have the same gremlin in my mind. It's in there.
Well, I think this is a good place to move on to our next big news topic, which we've talked about a few times in the past. Will they, won't they? Is it going to be something different? But now we know for sure, much to my personal dismay, because I was planning on going, E3 2023 has been officially canceled. This has come after a lot of rumors, a lot of companies kind of slowly pulling out. Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox had all already confirmed that they were not planning on attending. And then this past week, some other third-party companies pulled out, and after that, it was just kind of a snowball. And it's now officially not happening, which to me is a huge bummer. I always looked forward to E3 every year, and I can kind of understand why this is happening, but yeah, it's still a bummer nonetheless, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's not like E3 would have come back in the same way that we knew and loved it. It would have been a very downsized version with none of the big three being there. It was pretty much already dead a while ago, but this feels like kind of the final nail in the coffin. Being canceled like this 2 years in a row is pretty harsh, and I don't see that being any different in future years. Like, there's no reason for all these companies to come around next year and be like, no, actually, this time we want to be in the show. Like, this seems pretty final at this point.
Yeah, it seemed like the real final blow was when Ubisoft pulled out. They said, we're skipping E3 and we're doing our own live event.
Yeah,
which is
Sega as well.
the new trend, basically. Yeah, and then Sega followed, and then, there were reports that other companies hadn't really announced anything, but they weren't planning on being there at this point, now that, it's kind of like a snowball effect, right?
Yeah.
Like, one company pulls out, and then everyone's like, oh, we shouldn't be there either. So, yeah, it's a bit of a bummer, for sure. I mean, it's not like we're not going to get any video game news this summer, right? And so, in a way, it still feels kind of silly, because we're still going to get all the same announcements we would normally get. But there's something about that particular format that I think a lot of people hold nostalgia for. Tom, how are you feeling about this?
Sorry, I was just taking a moment of silence for E3. I don't, you know what? I'm very complicated feelings, because it's weird for me, for myself, to care about something that doesn't matter, like literally doesn't matter. Video games matter, and then E3 is like below that. Like, video games, it's not war or politics, right? But they matter. They're art, right?
Right.
But E3 is like a whole nother few layers of hell below that or above that. So I don't know. I mean, it's not. I don't know if it's a bad thing. I don't think people younger than us know even what E3 is or care about it.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a good point.
It's it's been digital. Nintendo went digital in 2013. They haven't been doing conferences, and the conferences are so like old game media that they're almost they almost feel like parody at this point, like how these big companies would present games on a stage in front of people, and totally out of touch. And I think there's part of that,
like when Microsoft would drop down a car from the ceiling during
Right.
their Forza reveals and stuff like that.
I just think,
Yeah.
I mean, that stuff's never worked, but it really, that doesn't do anything for anybody anymore in the world we live in. And it is unfortunate though, but we know with Nintendo, the 9,000 different way Nintendo decides to announce games, and it seems like every new game that gets announced outside of the E3 cycle, it's closer to the actual release date. I mean, at this point, Metroid Prime is the most recent example, right? It seems like the games announced it. The games companies are forced to announce at E3 are the ones that are least done and farthest away, like Metroid Prime 4 or
Mm-hmm.
Tears of the Kingdom. Like, the games you have to be a good show at E3 is maybe a bad thing. Like, that pressure, that crunch, whatever it causes these companies, this pressure to announce that game, where it's healthier probably to be like, hey, here's a tweet, Pikmin 3 Deluxe is coming out next week. Here's a tweet, Paper Mario or Origami King's coming out in 7 minutes.
Right.
Okay, maybe not that far though.
I know, but that's those games I'm thinking of are games they announced on Twitter, right? Outside of the
during
direct.
COVID, I think.
Yeah, so that's how I feel about it. Is the culture of E3, for the sake of the show, maybe caused the companies to make decisions that ended up actually hurting the people that work for them and the consumer, because they wanted to win E3, right? And I think they're just over winning E3 because you don't get anything anymore. And I think Nintendo, being a Nintendo podcast, is the one who spearheaded this and proved that. At first, you don't need that.
I think there's absolutely a strong argument for that. Yeah, and ever since the whole reason E3 was necessary was because it was really at its strongest at a time when the internet was not this ubiquitous thing. It was not the only way that people got their video game news, and it was mostly, it was not something that was open to the public. It was something that was designed to connect these companies with each other, with media, also with physical retailers. This was an event that representatives from Target and Walmart would go to and figure out which games they're going to stock on their shelves in the next year. I mean, and all that has just changed. It's, with everyone buying their games digitally now and companies being able to market directly to the consumers, there's just no need for a lot of these companies to, as they see it, probably spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to fly a whole staff of people out and build these big booths when they can just host a live stream out of their offices in Washington somewhere, and So it's like I get it, I really do. But at the same time, just for me, there's just always been something about having like this 1 week every year where you know you can tune in and it's just like bam, 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 announcement after announcement, and you're just like, wow, like what a cool time to be into video games, you know?
Oh, I loved it. I mean,
And
I loved that week. I literally would take off days of work just so I could just veg out for 3 days. I don't even, there wasn't a game on at EA's press conference I would even think about purchasing. I still watched it just to be part of the like energy. of
sure,
it.
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And that I will miss. But and another thing I think we're losing, I think it's underreported, is like the further distancing from game companies to like legacy media, and lack of access. And you know, I'm sure we struggle with that here at Nintendo Everything, of like this kind of pattern
We do.
of publishers going, we don't need you. We just need streamers, right? We just need influencers to kind of market our games, instead of like trained like people that can actually give like an honest critique on something, right? And that, I think
Right.
that is a problem. But you know, obviously legacy media has not always done their role and their part on that equation either. But as less physical shows occur, the less access that like the media gets to these games in an important way that we are losing. That person to person kind of access, where it's like they're forced to confront questions that aren't perfectly what they want, and that is something you lose with E3. But you know, there is some other stuff like PAX or something that there's opportunities for that, but it's obviously a different scale than E3.
Yeah. And you always
Right.
have
Yeah.
Jeff Keighley swooping in like a vulture to be like, hey, Summer Games Fest is still on.
Yeah. I mean, well, I will like give like them at least a little bit of credit. Last year they, Summer Games Fest, they had their first kind of big in-person media event. And I got to go to it, and it was a much smaller event than something like E3 would be. But because of that, it felt very intimate, and so, I would be sitting down playing an indie game, and the developers are right next to me, and I could just ask them a question, be like, oh, like, tell me about this thing, and they'll be like, oh yeah, we're working on this feature, and blah blah blah. So like, I think there's still gonna be things like that. Just we're probably not gonna see something at the scope of E3 again.
Yeah.
And I mean, who knows? Maybe by the grace of God, this thing will come back next year in full force, but I just don't see it after being canceled 2 years in a row. I don't really know how they would recover from that, get these companies and, also all these media outlets who had probably, some of them already booked travel and things like that, give these people confidence that this event is actually going to happen at some point. So,
And we're seeing the shift further. I mean, we were just talking about how Nintendo refuses to show anything about Tears of the Kingdom, right? Like, there's this kind of turn toward being very careful about when you show your game and hiding things for some reason now. Like, there's this shift that's happened recently. So, yeah, I there's probably a lot of reasons why E3 is dying. Bring back Space World, Nintendo, I dare you. I want that
Oh my
Pokemon
gosh,
Gold
that'd
and
be
Silver
incredible.
beta.
Bring back the Nintendo World
do-
Championships.
yeah, it does kind of baffle me a little bit that, so Nintendo, they've started hosting, the name eludes me right now, but they've started hosting like a big show in Japan each year. Like a big Nintendo event
yeah.
that they run. But they don't really have an equivalent of something like that here in the West, and I would love to see it, even if it's just even if it's not this media focused thing, if it's just this big, Nintendo organized fan event,
Yeah.
Big fan conference where everyone can come and play new Nintendo games and Street Pass and reminisce about old
you're
school
right.
stuff. And
You're right. It does seem like they've downsized NOA, doesn't it? Like their actual role in the marketing. Like it doesn't seem like they have as much
they totally have
to do with it. And I know they even closed offices, so maybe they literally have.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't seen Doug Bowser. Is he a robot now? Has he been transmogrified in some way? Like we saw him when he was like hired, and they did that bit with Bowser and the tie. and like I don't think we've seen him since. Like there does seem to be a considerable downsize and shift away from the personality led Nintendo that also goes hand in hand with E3 going away too.
For the
I
record,
can confirm Doug Bowser is a real person because I did see him from a distance at the Game Awards.
But like Reggie,
So-
From
was
a
he
distance,
a robot?
though.
Yeah, was he Reginator? Was he Doug? Was he turned into a
That's a
robot?
good point. That's a good point. I don't know. If maybe they have some next generation technology there that we're not aware of. But
for the record, by the way, the Japanese Nintendo event is Nintendo Live. It has a whole bunch of
right.
like concerts and tournaments, and I think game demos.
yeah,
And there
that
is an
sounds
NO,
awesome,
there's an
man.
NOA side to that too. There's an American and English version of Nintendo Live they just never use
Yeah.
that name.
Yeah, it's also not really like an announcement
What's
thing.
the-
I think it's more like of a convention have fun thing, which is still, still good to have.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
I believe you can
Um,
follow it on Twitter, Nintendo Live, but it's not something they clearly use at all.
You mean like they have the brand here in North America, but they don't really do anything with it? Is what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, maybe someday we'll see it. I would personally love to go to something like that. All right. In other news, one of the things we talked about last week was the death of the 3DS and Wii U eShops, which we've talked about several times. It's all very sad, and it's officially like over now. It's I'm still reeling and recovering a little bit.
Pack it
mentally,
up, go
but,
home.
I know. I was
Yeah,
literally
pretty much.
like collecting my last like 5 purchases. I'm like, okay, I'll get $60 to do one final sweep through to get what's left. It felt very like a funeral.
Yes.
And
yes,
I'm
very
like
much.
and like the E3's eShop keeps crashing, and I'm like, this is probably for the best. Like as tears roll down my face because it's the worst.
Yeah.
It's the worst digital storefront in history.
Yeah, that would be an interesting conversation to have.
Counterpoint: the Switch exists.
Yeah, it's
No, when I'm trying to
Yeah,
find,
well-
I'm trying to find some DLC or something for Fire Emblem, and I have to sift through 5,000 trailer videos. Like, no, it's definitely I can't even sort out trailers
You don't like trailers being placed alongside games?
and randomly. Like, there's like
Yeah.
like one main series game's like page 16 because there's 43 trailers, and Nintendo minutes in between.
But it had store music.
and Tom, I think you're missing the very valuable benefit that you could on your Wii U, you could browse 3DS games on the Wii U eShop, but not buy them. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that?
Yeah, window
That's
shopping at its
essential.
finest.
Well, it would
Yeah.
convince you. That's really funny, actually. It would convince you as a Wii U owner without a 3DS to get a 3DS because that happened, right? There was a lot of those.
Yeah, he was like, "Oh, that's where all the games are. I see. I should go buy one of those." Yeah. Anyways, that was not quite as smooth of a segue as I'd planned in my head. But it was just kind of funny to me that the week after the Wii U and 3DS eShops died, we saw I guess official release is not the way to put it, but there's a well-known emulator for GameCube and Wii games called the Dolphin emulator. And they chose this whole time period to release their emulator on Steam to make it much more accessible to folks. To be clear, this is just like the emulator software itself. It doesn't include any games because that would not be legal. But yeah, it was just kind of amusing to me that the whole timing of everything altogether.
I agree. If Nintendo doesn't want to put GameCube games out in any way, yeah, there's this non-committal.
Yeah. Well, as far as Nintendo's concerned, the GameCube may as well just not even have been a thing. Like, the games are not available anywhere. It's not like it's something they would acknowledge, really. So, but yeah.
Now,
it's just,
I am confused, by the way. Like, to be honest, why does this matter? Because you can download the emulator for free? Like, what is the point? What's the benefit of it coming to Steam? I guess is my question. Is it because of you could use it on your Steam Deck? Is that like the main
I
reason?
think that's part of it.
That's probably part of it. Yeah. And also just general accessibility. I think a lot of folks, say you have purchased physical copies of games and you want to play them
Of course.
on your computer.
Of course.
Of course. And say you want to go through the very tedious process of figuring out how to legally dump your physical discs and extract all the files. And, there's a big technical hurdle in figuring out where you can download this emulator from after going through that
I couldn't
very
imagine
technical
Googling
process.
Dolphin emulator.
Right. But having it on Steam is clearly the solution to that problem.
I mean, I think it also gives it more of a sort of official backing. Obviously not official in respect to Nintendo, but in respect to it being like a proper thing that people use, kind of. It makes it more than just a use it for piracy. If anyone would do that, But it gives it that little bit more of an official stance compared to where it was before, which might also be what they were kind of looking for.
Yeah, like more visibility, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, it gives me a little bit of hope that, like, even though Nintendo is shutting down these big storefronts, a lot of these games are still going to live on in other ways, and that's one of the great things about the internet is things never really die, and so, it's...
Right.
It gives me a little bit of hope that, some of these games will still have other ways to live on in the future.
I do want to say briefly before we move on, like, in seriousness, the Dolphin team and the Dolphin emulator is the best emulator ever made. They are the best team working in this space, and so if you're gonna have one, like, the Dolphin emulator pretty much works perfectly at every GameCube release that you painstakingly dumped legally onto your computer.
Right.
Like, and it's super user friendly. You can hook up GameCube controller adapter to your PC, like even the Nintendo one, and it's like automatically ready to go with it. You don't even have to do much to like get that working. So if emulation seems like not a thing worth doing, the Dolphin emulator specifically is like shockingly like amazing, and leagues beyond a lot of other Gen 6 kind of emulation efforts.
Yeah, I've messed around with it a little bit, and I think there are even ways to hook up your Wii sensor bar to your computer and get the full functionality and stuff like that. It's crazy. It's crazy what these small teams can do. All right, well, let's shift gears into some talk about games, because that's what we're all here for, really. The big announcement that we got this week. It's been a little bit of a slower week for game announcements. We're kind of in that weird middle season. This is when all the games that were announced are coming out. So not as many big announcements overall. But I think a fairly big surprise for me personally was we're getting a King of Fighters game on the Switch, which is notable because I remember back when the Switch first came out, it was kind of close to when King of Fighters 14 was coming out, and a lot of folks were really hoping that would come to Switch, and it just never really materialized. But we're getting King of Fighters 13 Global Match, which we don't have a ton of information on, but it is, for context, the King of Fighters 13 originally came out in 2010. So this is not a new game by any stretch, but it remains one of the more popular entries in that franchise. Mm-hmm. And this is the first time that this game in particular has come to a Nintendo platform. So yeah, I'm excited. I like these games. I've never owned one on a console before, but I remember playing them in the arcades, and it would be really cool to have something like this on the Switch.
Yeah. Honestly, this felt like an April Fool's announcement. It isn't, not at all, but this is such a bizarre just step for them to be taking. It's very surprising. It's super cool. I think King of Fighters 13 is generally recognized as being one of the better entries in the series. It's the last sprite-based game in the series, I think, and it has some gorgeous sprite work.
Yes.
And this version of the game is going to have rollback netcode, which basically just means it's going to run online pretty darn well so long as the netcode is well implemented. The original King of Fighters 13 did have online functionality, but it was in the era where this was still kind of an early thing, so it could be pretty rough. This should hopefully run pretty darn well. It's just really nice to see. I think the Switch has gotten some other SNK fighting games, other King of Fighters games before, but they've been like some of the really old ones, like the early 2000s,
like
pre 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the most modern one. This is going to be the most modern one on the system, and it's a darn good choice for one.
Yeah, it's always surprised me that we haven't got. I mean, don't get me wrong, we do get a good amount of fighting games on the Switch, but a lot of them are either like smaller indie projects or are just re-releases of really old ones. Like, if you want like 30 different ways to play Street Fighter 2, by all means, Switch is your system. But anything from within the past decade or so is a little more hit and miss.
Yeah, I mean, Mortal Kombat 11
so
is like the only recent like modern fighting game that's been on Switch. None of the Street Fighters, none of the Tekkens, none of the King of Fighters have been on the system.
Yeah. I'm really not sure why that is. I feel like the Switch could handle a lot of these games, but
also
but maybe not.
Dragon Ball Fighters, right? That's also on Switch.
Oh yeah. And like I said, there's some stuff, but I think a lot of the more mainstream, for lack of a better way to phrase it, a lot of the more mainstream fighting games have kind of been missing for a while. So
I do think
I'm excited.
Oh, sorry. The fighting game genre, especially like that top tier, are like really into flexing the best graphics and visual fidelity at the highest frame rate possible. And I just don't think they would find it worth releasing if it has to be 30 FPS and downscale, because it's like I think that's part of the appeal perhaps for like Street Fighter 6 or Guilty Gear or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm personally like, I'm a more casual fighting game player. Like, I love playing them. I'm not really great at any of them, I would say. But like for me, like, I don't play these games because I need like the best performance ever or whatever. Like, I play them because I want to feel like I'm, beating the crap out of some weird ass other character with this other weird ass character that I'm playing as, and I enjoy just all the really interesting art styles that they're going for in these games. Like, the upcoming Street Fighter 6 just looks incredible, from an art direction perspective, and so, yeah. And I know the Switch can't necessarily probably handle things like that, but yeah, hopefully this will satiate some fighting game fan appetites out there. I do hope that if we get a more powerful Switch, that we'll start to see some more fighting games on it, because to me it feels like one of the big genres that is not represented as much as some others are on the Switch.
Yeah, I would love to get like a Street Fighter 6 or Tekken 8 on a Switch too. That'd be super fun.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, to be able to have something like that on the go.
Yeah I think that's really probably cool. If they are on a portable system, that's probably the main appeal. Is for people that are just traveling, even for professional players, just the ability to be able to play it on the go if you're just on a flight or something.
Yeah, keep your moves sharp.
Yeah. But regardless, yeah.
I guess the Steam Deck has kind of filled that void in that regard, because all those fighting games are on Steam, so yeah. This one is also just kind of a weird one, and I feel like I've heard of this before, but I'm not super familiar with it. Hopefully one of you guys can give me some context, but it's a Dragon Quest game, but it's called Infinity Strash Dragon Quest: The Adventure of Dai.
I love Square Enix.
Not like yeah. To be clear, not Dai like DIE, like Dai like DAI, like a name apparently. I don't know anything about this, but it has Dragon Quest in the name, and so I'm a little intrigued.
I don't know anything about I don't know anything about the game, but as a big Dragon Quest guy, I love me some Dragon Quest. This is a manga, the Adventure of Dai, from like the 90s, that never came
Oh.
to America until recently. So just recently they started translating, I think sometime last year, this 90s Dragon Quest manga to the West. So I assume this is part of that initiative. And I think there's an anime too.
Yeah, it got
like
animated
they really
recently.
pushed. So like they're like, I don't know, they saw the Dragon Quest IP. What do we have in the coffers that the weebs haven't got yet, right? And so they pulled this old manga out and they've been pushing it now. And looks like there's now a game portion. I don't know much about the game, but it's clearly part of this broader strategy of building Adventure of Dai to be a bigger kind of a brand part of Dragon Quest. Have like their Dragon Ball-esque kind of pillar to it.
Yeah, I mean, it looks, when I was looking at one of the older trailers for this game, it looks like so different than anything from a Dragon Quest game. So I was like, what the heck is this? But that makes more sense, the context that this has anime and manga roots.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's, as far as I can tell, I don't want to say it looks like it almost looks like an action RPG, but it looks almost, it's really hard to pin into a category.
This game feels like those like Demon Slayer games. That's kind of the vibe
yeah.
I'm getting.
I it's like the Final Fantasy 16 of Dragon Quest,
That's funny.
which is very bizarre, but yeah, because it's sort of Warriors-esque, but probably not to like that extent. So I think something like
not thousands of enemies on screen.
yeah,
Warriors,
so something like Final Fantasy
yeah,
7
okay.
Remake or Final Fantasy 16 is probably the best comparison you could draw.
This is not the Dragon Quest news I'm looking for. So I'm looking for where is my Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D and where is my Dragon Quest 12? That's what I need to know. I don't need this.
Yeah,
It's been
that's what
2-3
the people
years.
want.
It's been a while, and
It's been a few years, yeah.
I cannot wait to play Dragon Quest 3 in that style. Dragon Quest 3 is an all-time. I mean, I know, right? What big hot take, great game, right? But it is, and
Oof.
so I can't wait
Getting
for a
controversial here.
58th version of that game.
What's exciting is that at this
Yeah.
rate, we're probably going to get Dragon Quest 12 on the Switch too.
Oh,
Now,
maybe.
Nicholas, I don't want to give you false hope or anything, but no, I mean, I would love to see it. It just,
I don't think so either.
No?
you know, I mean, they're making the offline version. You'd think if there's ever a time for that game to come over, it would be with this offline version. But
No,
For
he said
12?
12.
That's
He said,
precisely why
he
they
said
won't do it.
12, Nick. He said 12.
Oh,
The new
oh,
that we've
not-
only seen a logo
yes.
for.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking of the one
Of
on
10,
the Wii that
yeah.
was
10.
online.
10,
I mean,
Yeah,
if we do
yeah.
get 10, that'd be great,
Yes.
but
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I have no idea what's going on with 12. It feels like that game was announced forever ago and just it's floating out in the ether somewhere, presumably in development.
Yeah,
but
I gave up on
who
10 a
knows?
long time ago. I'm not worried about 10 anymore. It's just a sad thing that we'll never get.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for those of you who still want that game, keep your hope alive. We're talking about Dynasty Wars like games, and so this was another kind of strange announcement from this past week. It's in the Nobunuga's Ambition franchise. We're getting a Nobunuga's Ambition game in the West, which is not something that happens very often. This one is called Nobunuga's. I keep missaying this. Nobunaga's Ambition.
Yes, Nobunaga.
Awakening. Yes. Yeah. So this franchise, it's one of the big, I guess, Warriors style franchises that we don't get a lot of in the West. I think presumably because the developers think that not a lot of people can either pronounce clearly or are familiar with who Nobunaga is.
yeah.
But yeah, this is one of Koei Tecmo's bigger Warriors franchises, and so it's kind of cool that it's getting a Western release. Last year we got another kind of offshoot franchise. We got Token Ranbu Warriors, which was another one that was like, yeah, we don't really get these games in the West, so
Yeah.
Well, my favorite Nobunaga's ambition is Pokemon Conquest.
I was gonna say it. Yeah.
Yeah, these are like really hardcore like turn-based strategy games. I think there was one on PS4, but I think that the last Nintendo one was Pokemon's Conquest, which is such a weird wrinkle and a great game, to be fair. But yeah, it is interesting that the new ones come into Switch, because I'm always surprised when any new game in a series that normally on Nintendo comes to it, because that takes some work, right? That takes some elbow grease.
Yes. And yes, thank you for clarifying. This one is not one of their Warriors-based entries. This is more of a grand strategy type of experience.
I believe they have a spin-off that is like a Warrior-style game, but it's based on the core series, which are these like grand strategy RPGs where you control an entire battlefield.
Right. Yeah, and this genre is also one that I feel like on paper is really good on the Switch, but without like in practice, like I've played some of these bigger scoped grand strategy games, and like the action is so kind of zoomed out a lot of times that it can be kind of hard to parse on the smaller screen. But it's cool that it's coming over nonetheless, because there's definitely an audience for games like this that are probably very excited about this announcement right now.
Mm-hmm.
Another genre we don't get a ton of, but we're starting to see more of, is simulation racing games. I think the main reason we don't get a lot of these is just because the Switch can't really handle a lot of them. But one franchise that has been pretty consistent has been the MotoGP franchise. I believe we've seen some other games from this company before, Milestone. They have a couple different racing franchises. And I'll be interested to see how this one plays out. I'm not in particular like super knowledgeable about motorcycle racing, but I think it's cool that it's coming over, because I do think there's kind of a genre void here that it'd be nice to see some more games in, for sure.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I want to boot up a racing game, though, I get the Xbox Series X out. I want every gigabit. I want every teraflop. I want to feel the engine roar, and so I need the big screen, the 4K. When I get into like Dirt 4 or Forza Horizon, like I need to sit down with those haptic feedback triggers. Like I need it all. So I don't know how the Moto's GP series is but like when I want a good old even like Daytona, the Daytona 360 port that's on Xbox One through buying it online on a Wayback Machine, I think you have to load it up on, like that's a great port too. So I think with the Switch, you're right, the performance is difficult. It's same way. I think it's the same as fighting games, where performance and visuals in racing games and fighting games go hand in hand so strongly, because they're the games that like flex the best graphics every time, but also performance. They're like they're very similar. They're like twins almost, the fighting and racing genre. So I think there's no surprise that the Switch has trouble getting them.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's one of the things that, again, if we do get a new generation of Switch, I would hopefully it'll be powerful enough to run some more of these releases. But yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, Tom, about like, man, if I can't see every little blade of foliage while I'm racing by at 60 frames per second, like
it's not about seeing, it's about feeling it. You gotta feel the blades of grass, the crunch of the gravel.
It really makes you feel like a race car.
Yeah. That was my review on IGN. How did you know?
So wait, you're saying that the HD rumble isn't realistic enough for you to like feel the sensations of the engine?
Look, as much as we loved riding on a scooter in Mario Kart Odyssey, no, it is not.
I would love to see a game called Mario Kart Odyssey. That'd be fantastic.
Mario Kart. That's what it would be. Mario Odyssey. Sorry, Super Mario Odyssey. Remember, you got the scooter
racing around. Yep. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
They had the HD rumble, and it just feels a little tinny. It's a little tinny. It doesn't have the grit and the crunch and the
Yeah,
Cut
they
this
did
bit.
advertise
Cut
it with
this bit.
ice cubes, not engine sounds. Yeah. All right. One more announcement I want to shout out this week. This is a really cool indie game. It's a little bit of a deep cut, but this game is called Savant Ascent Anniversary Edition, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of folks hadn't heard about this one. But it's notable because it's from the team that developed Owlboy, which was a really highly acclaimed platformer. Yeah. Yeah, this was their game that came out before Owlboy.
Yeah, this is very different.
And yeah, it's so different. Yeah, it's a completely different vibe. This game is looks super super fast paced. It's more of a, I mean, still a platformer, but a lot more run and gun, it seems like. There's a huge emphasis on shooting at enemies, and it's all just very flashy. And yeah, they're basically making a full remaster of their original game with a totally new soundtrack, which when I was watching the trailer, I was like, dang, that's a good soundtrack. So yeah, this one was not on my radar at all, but I'm actually pretty curious about this one now.
Yeah, it looks neat. Sorry, the fact it's from the Owlboy dev still blows my mind.
Because it's so different.
It's so different. I mean, you still go up for what that's worth, but
you go up. You still move
you still
in a direction.
Control a character. Yep. Yes.
I'm pro Anniversary Edition. I'm just pro bringing games back to modern consoles.
Making anything available is great.
Right.
Well, yeah, and it's, I think this might be the first time a lot of folks have heard about this game, and so if they weren't doing an Anniversary Edition, so it's a way to expose older things to new people too, which is kind of cool. So yeah, this one is scheduled to come out sometime this summer. We don't know exactly when, but yeah, it looks like a really unique project from this developer. Now, in terms of what's actually come out this past week or so, like I said, things have been a little bit slower, but a few things we wanted to shout out. First one we've talked about a little bit in the past. This is the new MLB The Show game, MLB The Show 23, which I'm still baffled that this PlayStation developed game is on Microsoft and Nintendo systems. It's incredible. It's one of those things that makes me question what timeline we're living in.
I'll never forget the gruff Muppet that talked over
right.
the announcement of 22 in a Nintendo Direct for 6 minutes.
Yeah, that was a wild time. Yeah, but no, Tom, this is where I feel where I'm it's cool that this is running on a handheld, but this is something I'd probably play, in all its 4K glory.
Exactly. When it comes to simulation games, it is about, detail and things like that, right? Graphical and game performance, because it's trying to simulate a real life action, and that's difficult to do, right?
Right.
Is this one on Game Pass? I know the older one made waves because it was on Game
It
Pass.
is.
So that might be a good way to try it. If you and probably the performance will be on par with kind of the intentions. I'm very skeptical of all these sports games on the Switch. They all kind of have nefarious practices of downloading 90% of the 80 gigabyte thing on the cartridge has just the icon image of the Switch home menu.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. Yeah, it's probably not the ideal way to play for most folks, but if you have no other option or you're looking for a portable place, I mean, it's worth noting that this is actually the only portable version of this game. I know a lot of folks are saying you can play stuff on the Steam Deck, but a lot of the sports games don't get PC releases, and I'm still not totally sure why that's the case, but yeah, this is technically the only official way to play this game portably, so yeah, kind of cool. On the indie fronts, that's where things get a lot more exciting this week. I've been hearing a lot about this one. I haven't picked it up yet, but it's from what I've seen from reviews, has been getting nothing but praise. This game is called Dredge, and it's a little bit hard to pin down, but the premise is you are piloting this fishing boat, and it's kind of a horror game. So you're going around and you're fishing, but there's this whole mystery. You know, you might start fishing up some deep sea creatures, or you know, going through some mysterious storms and environments, and it's also, you know, you're just trying to uncover the mystery of all these spooky things that are happening around. I'm not doing a great job selling it, but this game has been getting a lot of praise and feedback just for its ambiance and for just being a really unique concept. It's got some resource management elements, so I've heard the gameplay loop is also pretty addicting. I'm pretty curious on this one.
Yeah.
I love games that put their main gaming verb as the title. And that's what this
Dredge.
It's a very confident
Yes.
it's a very confident pitch. Like you know when you hear that word if you're into this or not.
I mean, I'm down for a Lovecraftian fishing simulator.
Yeah, it's certainly unique, that's for sure. Yeah, I don't know. I like little experimental things like this. This is the kind of game when a game is difficult to categorize into a genre, it tends to grab my attention. I'll say that. So yeah, that's probably, I would say, maybe the standout indie release of the week. But this one is also kind of cool. This one is called Gripper, and I remember when this one was announced, people just thought it was cool because you're driving the bike from Akira. That was kind of its main selling point. But the more I look at it, it seems like it actually looks like it could be pretty fun to play too. It's a vehicular combat game where you're on this motorcycle the whole time, but it's also kind of a top-down shooter. So you're controlling this motorcycle and you're kind of drifting around enemies, but also trying to shoot them at the same time. There are also some segments that look like they're a little bit more traditional, kind of like driving-based segments. We're going through those like cylindrical tunnels and you're kind of racing on the walls and all that and avoiding obstacles. So it seems like there's quite a bit to this game. And it looks cool. I love the visual style. It's got a little bit of a cyber neon-y, you know, aesthetic to it. Looks like a cool little project.
Yeah, the premise is super neat. All the gameplay segments look very fun, especially the kind of top-down arena ones. Those remind me of something like another indie game, Fury, which is all like sequential boss fights and like the sort of cyberpunk neon aesthetic. It looks really cool.
Yeah, I forgot about that game. Yeah, I can totally see that comparison. It does look like a similar pace and like cadence to the combat and a similar style for sure. But yeah, hopefully this one is good. I think it looks really interesting. And then the last release I want to shout out this week, this one has been in development for quite a while, and I don't know too much about it, but it's called The Last Worker, and it's supposed to be kind of a satirical game. You play as a employee in this large shipping retail commerce company that is not technically Amazon, but is kind of supposed to be like a cyberpunk, like dystopian version of Amazon. And it's a first-person puzzle game is its genre. So you're using this thing that looks like a like a barcode reader of sorts to like move around boxes and solve environmental puzzles. Apparently there's some stealth elements to it. I don't really know what to make of this one, but it's bizarre, which I feel like is worth mentioning sometimes.
Yeah, it feels like it's very much inspired by the old first-person, not walking simulators, but things like Portal, the Stanley Parable, those kinds of games.
Yeah, I could see that comparison for sure. I think the main thing they're focusing with this one is its satirical elements.
Yeah.
I remember reading some previews about it, and they're really trying to dig at Amazon and their labor practices and they're anti-union busting and stuff. So it may not be for everyone if you're not really looking for that sort of commentary. But I'm curious to see how this one lands with folks. Haven't heard too much about it, but it's an interesting premise for sure. All right. Well, that just about wraps up our show. Thank you so much to everyone who has gotten to this point in the episode. We really appreciate all of our listeners. But before we go, we're going to end with our recently renamed segment, thanks to Tom's contributions to this podcast. Refresh Rates, where we talk about what we've been playing the past week or so. Tom, it's been a while since we've had you on the show. What have you been playing lately?
I was half expecting the name to be retired by now, so I appreciate it's long lasting. At this point, it's not new anymore. At this point, it's here to stay.
That's true. Yeah. No, I have not come up with anything better, and I don't think I will. So this is the name of the segment.
Well, I was telling Nick before, and I will not, I promise, I will not spend another 10 minutes talking about Fire Emblem Engage, even though I have been playing that. And I'll bring up another game that I think we'll all have opinions on, because I have been playing Zelda 2 a lot recently. And if you know something about
Zelda 2?
Zelda 2.
Wow.
I did not grow up with Zelda. We were a Mario household. And so all my Zeldas, I've had to fill in post-childhood, right? So I don't have any of like the same warm fuzzies with everybody. Now, there's 2 gaping holes in my Zelda playthrough. Do not crucify me, but it is the N64 ones. I haven't played those yet. I've played all the others. Except for Oracle.
Hey, no, that's okay. I mean, the Zelda franchise is so long running, and unless you're super old, you probably didn't grow up playing every mainline Zelda game.
Yeah, and there's part of me. I don't know if either of you do this, where you're like, you just save some 10 out of 10s. Like when the time's right, you like when you need it, it'll be there. Like some first time. So that's what those games are for me. Is like I know I'll enjoy them. But Zelda 2 is one of my favorite Zeldas. I think it might be top 3. And I know that's like super crazy, but I got into a Zelda 2 funk this past few weeks, and it's one of those games where when I get into the Zelda 2 funk, it's not like I just play it to beat it. I beat it over and over again, because it doesn't take that long to beat. It's one of those games you can kind of sit down and beat in 2 sessions maybe. And so that's where I'm at right now. I want to hear what your all opinion on Zelda 2 is, because for me, it's like, I love Zelda 2. I think it's incredibly fun. But let me hear how that hits everybody first.
I've never played it, but that based on what I've seen the general populace think, that is certainly an unpopular opinion.
Yeah, I've never played it either. I mean, I've always been intrigued by the concept of it, like mixing side-scrolling gameplay with the top-down, more, I guess, quote-unquote traditional Zelda. If you can even say that, if there even really is such thing as a traditional Zelda game. But yeah, it's always seemed like an interesting combo to me. I know it was kind of lambasted at the time for... It was not among the more popular Zelda games.
But
you seem to love it.
I think this game was not lambasted at the time. I think it's been lambasted in the 2000s.
Right.
More though, you know what I mean?
Okay.
I mean, this game sold 4 to 5 million copies, and I think was generally well received back then. Obviously, a very different game, but there was only one Zelda before anyway.
Exactly.
Too.
Yeah. There wasn't a baseline to be like, oh, well, this diverges completely from the gameplay style. Like, no, it was just the second game.
Sure. That's a good point.
To me, it is the best action game on NES. I think it combines the best of Metroid and Castlevania and Dragon Quest and Zelda into like one really fun action game, one great fusion. The combat it's like Dark Souls before Dark Souls. It's about slow, being careful, being methodical, but also being incredibly confident. And if you don't, you'll get wasted, right? And everyone loves Shovel Knight, and Shovel Knight, I think Shovel Knight's #1 inspiration is Zelda 2. So I know both of you haven't played this, so this is a blind spot for you. My blind spot, Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
Some argue just as popular as Zelda 2. And I think if this game's given the honest chance, you delete the internet noise around it of being a black sheep, you'll find an incredibly well made and almost shockingly playable NES game. Like, it's still really fun to play, moment to moment. And I think just people get afraid of it. And on the Switch, look, I know the game's hard and there's a game over state, but you got time, you got save states now these days. You got rewind.
Yeah, it seems like the ideal way to play it, honestly.
Well, there's some latency on NSO that I don't love. I do think somebody who has, like, I love, like, some old school, like, NES, like, I like Ninja Gaiden a lot. I like playing Ninja Gaiden, but I don't like playing it on Switch. I'd rather play it on, original NES or maybe an emulator or something, because the latency on NSO isn't great. But other than that, yeah, I mean, Zelda 2 is not as quick twitch as Ninja Gaiden, so that's fine. But I recommend it. I mean, if it's a hole in your NES backlog, and your Zelda backlog, I don't know. I think there's value in the game. Maybe pull up a map guide. No shame here. We're not shaming, and you don't have to do it like the true Christian way or whatever. There's a lot of crosses in the game. It's back in those days.
Oh man.
And I think you'll have a great time. And if not, we'll have to make a video guide on the site, and it may help you, because
Tears of the Kingdom comes out. You release a Zelda 2 guide.
Look, people need to know about it. Okay, it's got the best attack upgrade in video game history, the downward thrust. You all know it. You all know it from Smash Brothers. It's just as good in this game.
Wow, this is unexpectedly high praise for this game. Maybe I should go through and play it. I honestly, like, I never even really considered it.
Oh no, he's got you.
It's that mix, Nick. It's that mix of up and down guards. When your shield's, if you're not attacking, your shield's up when you're standing normal, and enemy hits you, projectiles. But then, like, some people complain about the Blue Knights. If you've played this game, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I don't know what's going on. Thank you for making it an hour and a half. The Blue Knights, after you hit them, they throw 7 swords at you in a row. And they come from high up and down below, but people don't know to look behind them, because you'll see the where, if it's going to be a low or high sword when he rears back. And so it becomes almost a rhythm game where you have to press up, down, reacting to his sword behind him, that animation. Every enemy in the game is smartly designed like this to play this defense-offensive mix. That's super, like, satisfying and addicting, and that's what's great about Zelda 2 is the combat. That kind of defense, offense, up down movement. It has this rhythm game, almost a pleasure to it.
Yeah, no, that's the way you're describing it does make it sound pretty unique compared to other Zelda games, and I think even that in of itself is intriguing to me. So I'll probably put it on my list of hopefully play someday, but I do have a harder time returning to a lot of NES games nowadays. I mean, I have a lot of nostalgia for the platform because we had one in my house when I was growing up, and so some of the first games I ever played were NES games, but going back to it nowadays has been a little bit of a mixed bag for me sometimes. But yeah, I'm intrigued by your passion for this game. I'll say that.
I'll take that as a win. I'll take this win because I was expecting pushback with the Zelda 2 praise, but I can't deny how I feel. It's such a fun
Can't
game.
lie to yourself.
I'm not gonna lie to the audience, Nick.
No, that's good. I don't want to suppress your passion, Tom. What kind of host would I be if I didn't let you talk about Zelda 2: The Adventure for Link in 2023 for as long as you can get away with?
Oh yeah, I could keep going. I mean, I could talk about how the villains of
in
Ganon.
Other news. No, that's great. Nicholas, what have you been playing lately?
Well, not Zelda 2, which might be blasphemy to some.
Oh.
But
I wake up every day, I get my
it.
Game & Watch out, my Zelda Game & Watch, I boot up Zelda 2 to start the day.
No, what I've been playing for the most part has been Bayonetta Origins. Basically just running through that and finishing it. And so that's pretty much done. I might consider doing a second playthrough soon on hard mode to unlock a few extra things, because I don't think it will take especially long for me to do that, but at the very least, I've been in the main mode and I've done pretty much everything I want to. And the game has been quite fun. I have one major gripe with it, which is the map, because I don't think that the map is super well designed. It ends up being very confusing and not super helpful. It's just not clearly labeled. Other than that, though, game's really fun. The visual style, like I'd mentioned before, super strong, really carries the game. The plot, now that I've actually finished it, is actually pretty good. There's a few things at the very, very, very end, in like a post-game side story, that is a little confusing because it relates to Bayonetta 3, and Bayonetta 3 is already incredibly confusing because of the whole multiverse shenanigans. But other than that, the plot is a really nice little self-contained story. The gameplay gets a little repetitive in a way, because the combat never hugely varies in terms of what you're doing, and there's a decent amount of it. But for some reason, it didn't bother me too much. For the most part, it still felt, I guess, dynamic enough that I didn't get too bored with it. And otherwise, the exploration is very fun. Ignoring the issues with the map, just not making it clear where you're going, it is very fun to just walk through these environments, solve the puzzles you need to, try and find the last little goodies and collectibles that you want. There's a lot of lore to be found, because like in most Bayonetta games, you have journals and whatnot that you can pick up that kind of fill out some of the story of what's been going on in the world, which I personally really enjoy. So yeah, overall, just an experience I really enjoyed.
Now, and this is the second time this has come up, but Tom, you were just saying that you have been, you beat Zelda 2 and you've been replaying it. And Nicholas, you were saying you're just about finishing with Bayonetta Origins and you're going to jump in and replay it again.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, like whenever I hear someone say that, I must be like, wow, like this game must be freaking incredible, because like I feel like I rarely, if ever, go back and immediately start a second playthrough of something I just beat.
Right.
Like for me to do that, something's got to really be like blowing my mind. You know?
Yeah. Well, for me, for the most part, it's just the kind of completionist mentality where I want everything to be done, even if that involves like getting one extra costume on a hard mode playthrough. So I certainly did enjoy the game. I wouldn't say it's like I don't know, for instance, my favorite games are, say, Breath of the Wild and Xenoblade Chronicles, and it's not like to that extent where the game is just so fun that I want to jump back in and replay it. It's mostly a combination of, if I want to do everything that the game has to offer, I have to play it again, and the game isn't so long that that's going to take me an ungodly amount of time. So I can afford to fit that in within another week and a half.
Look,
that makes sense.
Replaying games has the worst PR in the world. No one likes doing it, and it's the best thing you can do for your favorite games, because you get to know them on that level that you see other people talk about and do it, and you can join in on that like microscopic like memory level, like how people will say lines from their favorite movie. You can do that with your favorite games. And speaking from the guy who's on his third maddening rung in Fire Emblem Engage, sometimes like to
Lord.
really learn the game, right? To really learn the game, and if it's a game you're really enjoying, just sitting down and replaying it, maybe on replay it doesn't hold up as strongly, and you're like, you know what, this part sucks, and like you didn't really notice last time because it was your first time, so you didn't know. Or maybe it's way better than you even thought and you can't put it down. To me, replaying clarifies a lot about where games land on my favorites list, right? It's hard for me to like confidently say like I loved Hollow Knight, right? Loved it. I played so much of that. And it's a favorite game of mine I would consider, but I've never replayed it. And so I have some like trepidation of like, is it though? If I went and replayed it, would I like it as much? Probably. But I need that like confirmation, and for a game, well, and I don't know how long Bayonetta Origins is, but like Zelda 2 takes like a couple hours, right? That's what's great about NES games. Is like replaying it is like that. NES games are the plane trip game to me, like Dragon Quest 1, Ninja Gaiden, Zelda 2, like Castlevania. These are games I replay constantly because it almost feels like listening to a favorite album, right? Like it's
Sure,
that kind of
sure.
experience, especially ones I've played a lot, where you're just kind of going through and listen to the hits of this favorite level or set piece or sequence. So Nick, I implore you, find your favorites, go back to them. I think you'll get a lot out of it.
Well, don't get me wrong. I do replay games. I just don't typically replay them
Immediately.
after
Yeah.
beating them. Right. I'll go back to some of my favorites maybe a couple years after I originally beat them, or sometimes longer. But it's more of a rare thing for me, mostly because I feel like it's a lot of my. Maybe it sounds silly, but when it's a game that you hold in like really just high regard or high nostalgia, or something that you associate with a particular point in your life or whatever it is, going back and replaying something like that, there's that part of you that is going to be like, gosh, like what you were describing, like, is this going to feel the same way that it felt like when I was a kid or whatever, like, is it going to hit me in the same way?
Yeah.
And I feel like for the most part, I've been lucky in that it has, but you do bring up a good point, Tom. It can be a bit of clarity going back to something that you really enjoyed and being like, maybe this doesn't hold up as well as I thought it did originally, or maybe it holds up even better. Maybe it's aged like a fine wine. But yeah, it's an interesting dilemma. I think for me, there's just so many games out there, and I want to get a little taste of as much as I can, and so that's why I don't typically return to games, but there have been some exceptions over the years.
I'm still waiting on Xenoblade, Nick. When is that happening?
Yeah, let's hear what Nick's been playing this month or this week.
Okay, all right.
Let's hear.
Listen. I there's a reason for it, and I have a good explanation. And Nicholas, Xenoblade is on my list. It is penciled in for this summer after Tears of the Kingdom.
Got it.
Are you doing Switch remaster Xenoblade?
Yes.
Good.
Okay, good.
Yes,
okay,
I've been
that's
playing
good.
playing it on
okay,
the Switch.
just
Yes.
making sure. I want you to have a good time.
I was debating. Thank you. I was debating playing the 3DS version because there's some appeal in that to me. But yeah. All right. No. So this is gonna sound strange, and people are gonna be asking why, and I'll tell you why. But I've been playing the Marvel's Avengers game that came out. I want to say it was in 2021, and was not well received by a lot of folks. The game was mostly criticized for its microtransactions and locking a lot of things behind a paywall, but also just because it was very much leaning into a lot of the trends at the time in terms of everything needs to be an online games as a service type of thing. Everything needs to have like this big grindy post-game swath of content to suck up all your free time, and a lot of folks were just not looking for that from this game, myself included, which is why I didn't play it. I wouldn't even consider myself like a huge Marvel fan. Like, I enjoy some of the characters and some of the movies that I've seen, but like, I'm not the type of person who's like lining up to see every movie at a midnight release or anything. But the reason why I wanted to play this game is partially because it's getting delisted in September, and after they announced that it was getting delisted, presumably because of licensing reasons, they also announced that as of March 31st, they were going to be patching the game and making all of the paid microtransaction, all the cosmetics and all that was going to be free. And it was just going to be included in the game. And that to me was really interesting. And so I was like, I kind of want to see, now that years have passed, now that all this content that was previously locked behind it is free, and now that all the, kind of people who are disappointed with the online aspects, I just wanted to check out the campaign and see, like, is this like a good like Avengers story? Like, is this a satisfying superhero story? Does it still feel fun to play? And I'm not super far into it, but I'm actually pretty surprised by how fun the campaign is. It's I mean, you really do. You play as all the different Avengers characters. They all feel really distinct from each other. I mean, as you would hope, like there's a huge difference between when you're playing as the Hulk and like barreling through walls and crushing enemies with your big green fists to when you're playing as the protagonist of this game, who's Kamala Khan, who's which is like such a like unique like narrative choice for an Avengers game to be playing as this not super well known, Marvel character. And she plays totally differently. Her whole superpower is she has stretchy, bendy arms, and so she can fling punches like across the room, and she can extend her arms, and she can grow super big and step on enemies and stuff. Like it's crazy like how much variety they have packed into all these characters and their playstyles. And the story is like, again, I'm not super far into it, but I found it pretty engaging so far. And so it's been interesting to kind of replay it. It's certainly not the type of game that I normally gravitate to, which was kind of why I wanted to give it a shot before it's delisted and, made inaccessible for new players.
I mean, that's a valid reason. I think a lot of the complaints revolving around the game were about the online live service aspects of it. Because I had heard that some people enjoyed just the core gameplay a little bit. It was still relatively fun. It's just a lot of the whole microtransaction heavy battle pass live service elements that took away from the experience. So,
right,
like you said, making almost all the paid content, all the microtransaction content be available for free is certainly incentive for people to check it out, even if it's, it's too late for the game, but it's still something where people can
right.
experience it and see, maybe get like a glimpse of what the devs ideally would have wanted it to be if it wasn't originally planned for it to be a heavy live service multiplayer game.
I'm correct that Square Enix has sold Crystal Dynamics and Eidos to Embracer Group, right? Recently, for like I think it was $8. I believe they sold them for. It was something like it was some like shockingly low amount, as if they were complete failures. And those two studios are probably, in my opinion, some of the most talented AAA space developing studios. Maybe the talent's left because Square Enix keeps screwing with them whenever they try to make a video game. It's like there's always like a horrible like tumor they have to stitch onto their game that ruins the talent and the skill and of those studios. Because I mean, Deus Ex and the Lara Croft Tomb Raider games, like they're very, very well made games, and yet they all each one has weird Square Enix like corporate meddling that hurts the final product in serious ways. And then I think Marvel Avengers is like poster child for that meddling and the worst of it. And so
right,
it's unfortunate. Hopefully those studios retain some of that talent in the sale and are able to be given some freedom to just make good games again, because they are really good studios. But this Marvel's Avengers was one of the worst examples of corporate meddling we've seen in a while. It did not pay off.
It did not, but it is a shame, because I feel like when playing it nowadays, when you're looking at it through a different lens, you really can see like their vision, and you can see that like the people who were working on like making all these characters feel fun to play and creating a compelling world and story around it. You could tell they put a lot of work into that, and it just got saddled with all this other baggage that it didn't need. But yeah, it's interesting to return to. I would say if you're even a casual Marvel fan and you're curious about it, I'd say go give it a shot, because you might actually be surprised at the overall experience nowadays.
You said Zelda 2, right?
Yes, that's what I've been talking about this whole time, Tom.
Okay.
Yeah, Zelda 2. Yeah, underrated for sure. Yeah.
My
All
favorite
right,
Avenger.
folks, well, that-
My favorite Avenger. Link.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, he's just the original version of the Hulk. They're both green.
Oh,
It's just
right.
he's just gotten bigger over the years, and that's what happens.
He looks like Venom in Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. Now he's got the poison arm.
There you go. I was gonna say the Hulk is basically, it's just if you were to upscale Zelda to 4K, that's what it would look like. You just once you see it all in all the detail, it just looks way different.
That
lot
explains
of
the
sense.
pink hair in Link to the Past. He's mutant.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, I think that about wraps up our show for the week. So thank you everyone so much for tuning in. We really appreciate everyone who has been listening to us this whole time. We're almost at 50 episodes. Next episode is going to be our 50th episode, which I consider a pretty good milestone. So yeah, tell your friends. We want everyone to tune in for the big 50, and
The Mario
like what you
movie.
hear-
The Mario movie will be
Yeah!
a thing that we have seen.
that's
hopefully,
true.
So
Oh, I hope.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, I want to see it. Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be a good time. So yeah, please tell your friends, spread the word. One thing that would really help us if you can go to your podcast platform of choice and give us a rating if you like what you hear, because that'll help expose us to new listeners, which is always what we want. And yeah, I think with that, that's the end of the episode, and we will catch up with you guys next week with everything new and exciting in the world of Nintendo. See you guys later.